The night it ended, 3 plantations were burning. I know because I set them. Not with my hands. I was careful never to do anything with my hands. That was someone else's job. My job was the thing that came before. The thing that made everything else possible. I could hear the bells from where I stood. 3 different plantations. 3 different bells, all ringing wrong. That broken, frantic clang that means something has gone very, very bad. I stood at the edge of the tree line and I listened to those bells and I felt something I hadn't felt in 13 years. I felt like myself. 47 men were riding in circles that night. Searching. Shouting at each other in the dark. They were looking for a woman. A dangerous woman. A woman who had apparently organized something that, according to them, was impossible. They had a description. Female. Dark skin. Medium height. Could be anywhere between 20 and 40 years old. That was all they had. Because no one who knew my face was going to tell them anything. And no one who could tell them anything knew my face. I had made sure of that. My name is Nadia. I was born in Dakar in 1834. The records say I never existed. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The most dangerous person in 3 parishes, on the most important night of her life, and history has no record of her at all. They buried me before I was dead. This is the story of how I made them regret that. Let me take you back to the beginning. To a morning that smelled like salt and red earth and my mother's cooking fire. To the last day I was just a child. I was 9 years old the last morning I woke up at home. I remember the light first. In Dakar, the morning light comes in sideways, golden low, like it's apologizing for interrupting your sleep. I remember the sound of my mother grinding grain. That rhythm. That specific, steady sound. If I close my eyes right now, I can still hear it. After everything. After all of it. That sound survived. My mother used to say I came out of the womb already listening. Most babies cry when they're born. I didn't. The midwife told her I just looked around. Quiet. Taking everything in. My mother said it was the strangest thing she'd ever seen. She said it was like I already knew this world was going to require paying attention. She wasn't wrong. I was strange with language from the beginning. We spoke Wolof at home. But the port was 20 minutes walk from where we lived, and the port was the whole world. Arab traders. Portuguese merchants. Sailors from places I couldn't name yet. I used to stand at the edge of the market and just listen. Absorb. Like a cloth taking water. Other children would hear a foreign language and look confused. I heard it and felt it, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was in me. Within a day, I could repeat it back. Within a week, I could hold a conversation. My mother thought it was a gift from God. I think she was right. I just didn't understand yet what God intended it to be used for. That last morning, I went to the market with her. I remember haggling with a Portuguese sailor on her behalf. I was 9 years old, speaking his language back to him, and he kept looking at my mother like, "What is this child?" My mother was laughing. Proud. The sailor gave us a better price just because he couldn't believe what he was hearing. We walked home. The light was still gold. The grain was still grinding somewhere in the distance. And then the men came. I won't tell you everything about what happened next. Not because I've forgotten. Because I remember all of it, every detail, the way you remember something you've had to survive more than once. I'll only tell you this. It was fast. Faster than you'd think possible. One moment I was walking next to my mother. The next moment the world was noise and dust and hands grabbing. I heard my mother scream my name. I heard it cut off. That was the last sound from home. Her voice saying my name, and then, nothing. I was 9 years old. And I was already doing what I had always done. I was listening. Scene 3. The ship. The first miracle. Narrator delivery. Controlled rage beneath total calm. Like describing a nightmare you've made your peace with, but not forgiven. The hold of the ship smelled like salt and iron and fear. It was dark. Not dark the way a room is dark at night. Dark the way a grave is dark. Complete. Final. A darkness that pressed against your eyes like it was trying to get in. I didn't cry. I'm not telling you that to seem strong. I'm telling you because I think my body was in a state of shock that was deeper than tears. Crying requires a kind of feeling that needs an exit. I had gone somewhere past that. Past tears, past screaming, past the kind of grief that has a sound. I went somewhere quiet inside myself. And in that quiet place, I started to listen. There were maybe 200 people in that hold. Packed together, barely room to turn. Different villages. Different nations. Different languages. Fula. Mandinka. Igbo. Twi. The crew above spoke Portuguese. There was one guard, a Spaniard, who argued with the captain in a language that took me 2 days to identify as Galician. I catalogued all of it. The girl beside me was maybe 11 or 12. She wept quietly for the first 2 days. On the third day, she stopped crying and turned to look at me. She spoke in Fula. She said, "Are you afraid?" I didn't know Fula yet. I had been listening to her and the other Fula speakers for 3 days. Their rhythms. Their sounds. The way words bent at the end of a question. The way comfort sounded different from anger. I had been filing it all away in that quiet place inside me, building the architecture of a language I'd never heard before 6 days ago. On the third day, I answered her. In Fula. Not perfectly. I had maybe 40 words and the bones of a sentence. But she understood me. She went completely still. She stared at me in the dark the way you stare at something you cannot explain. She reached out and touched my face. Like she was checking if I was real. I didn't know how to tell her what I was. I didn't fully understand it myself yet. I just knew that this thing I'd always had, this water tongue, my mother called it, this wasn't just a gift for entertaining sailors at the market anymore. This was something else. By the time the ship docked in New Orleans 6 weeks later, I spoke Portuguese. Not broken Portuguese. Not ship Portuguese. Not the Portuguese of a 9-year-old guessing at words. The Portuguese of a native speaker. Accent and all. I know this because on the last day of the crossing, one of the sailors walked through the hold and I said something to him. A complaint about the heat, in his language. He stopped walking. He turned and looked at me. Really looked. He didn't say anything. He just walked away faster than he'd come. I filed that reaction away too. A man walking fast from something he can't explain. I would see that reaction many more times in my life. And I would learn to use it. New Orleans in August smells like flowers and rot. That is not a metaphor. It's just the truth of that city. Beautiful and decaying at the same time. Magnolias and mud and the river underneath everything, brown and slow and patient. They put us on the block on a Thursday. I remember looking at the crowd and thinking, I should learn everything about these people. I should learn their faces, their voices, their habits. I should learn what they want and what they fear, because those two things, what a person wants and what a person fears, are the only things that really matter. I was 9 years old. I had just survived 6 weeks in a ship's hold. And I was standing on a wooden platform in the heat, looking at the men who were bidding on me, and thinking tactically. I don't tell you this to impress you. I tell you because I want you to understand what that place does to a person, what it did to a child. The way it took something that should have been years away, that adult understanding of danger, and installed it in you overnight. Like a surgery you didn't consent to. The man who bought me was named Aldrich Fontenot. He was French Creole. Maybe 40. Educated in the way that wealthy men in Louisiana were educated. A thin layer of civilization painted over something much colder. He wore white linen. He had the kind of stillness that comes from never having been told no. He walked around me like I was a horse he was considering. He said something to the man beside him. In French. He said, "She has clever eyes. Probably trouble." The man laughed and said, "She's 9 years old, Aldrich." Fontenot looked at me again. I looked back at him. I did not look away. I understood every word he had said. And he had no idea. He raised his hand. He bought me. He thought he had purchased property. He had handed a lit match a place to live. The plantation sat in St. James Parish, about an hour's ride from New Orleans. Big house. White columns. Live oaks draped in moss that moved even when there was no wind. The kind of place that looked peaceful from far away and was something else entirely up close. They put me in the house. This was their first mistake. In the house, I was close to everything. Every conversation. Every letter read aloud. Every business meeting that happened over dinner while I stood in the corner being invisible. Fontenot had 2 young children with a tutor who came 3 times a week. I listened to their lessons from the hallway. I taught myself to read by watching their books over their shoulders. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever notices the child in the corner. That was the second mistake. Not realizing that invisible is not the same as absent. In my first year at the Fontenot plantation I learned the layout of every building, the patrol schedule of every overseer, the names of every business associate who visited, the content of every argument Fontenot had with his wife, and that there was a man named Bernard who brought supply wagons from New Orleans every 2 weeks and who spoke Spanish with his assistant in a way he thought no one understood. I understood. I spoke Spanish by March. A German merchant came to discuss cotton prices in the spring of my second year. He was there for 4 days. He and Fontenot had dinner every night. I served the table. I spoke German by the time he left. I want to be clear about something. This wasn't effort. It wasn't study. It wasn't the way you learned languages in school, all repetition and grammar rules and vocabulary lists. This was something different. Something I still don't have a complete word for. I heard a language and it was like remembering something. Like recognizing a face from a dream. The sounds would arrange themselves in my mind and suddenly I could see the architecture of it. The bones. And once I saw the bones, I could build anything on top of them. By the time I was 14 years old, I spoke 7 languages. Wolof, Portuguese, Fula, English, French, German, Spanish. And I had not let a single person on that plantation know it. Not even the woman who would eventually change everything. Her name was Cecile. Cecile had been on the Fontenot plantation since before I arrived. 32 years old. Thin in the way that comes from years of not quite enough food. Eyes that had seen everything and decided to keep seeing anyway. Not because the world deserved to be witnessed, but because watching carefully was the only power she had left. We worked together in the kitchen house. She was in charge. I learned early not to volunteer too much, not to let her see that I was capable of more than I showed. I liked her too much to risk what might happen if she knew. But Cecile was sharp. Sharper than anyone I'd met on that plantation, including Fontenot. One evening in late autumn, we were finishing the cleaning after supper. Everyone else had gone. Just the two of us, the dying fire, the smell of ash and food. Cecile was tired. The kind of tired that goes down to the bone. She muttered something to herself, under her breath, barely audible. She muttered it in Haitian Creole. I had been learning Haitian Creole for 3 weeks from a woman who passed through town with a merchant convoy. I had maybe 2/3 of it. Enough. Cecile said, "This place is going to kill me before I let it." Without thinking, and this was the only time in 13 years I acted without thinking, I answered her. In Haitian Creole. I said, "Then we can't let it." Cecile dropped the bowl she was holding. It shattered on the stone floor. She grabbed my wrist. Hard. She spun to face me and she stared at me the way you stare at someone you thought was one thing who just revealed themselves to be something else entirely. Her grip was strong. She was shaking. She said, still in Creole, her voice barely above a whisper, "How long?" I said, 3 weeks. She said, "How many languages?" I said, 7. 8 if you count Creole, which I'm still finishing. She didn't speak for a long time. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, an owl called once and went quiet. Then she said, "Child, do you understand what God gave you?" I said, "Not yet. But I'm starting to." She let go of my wrist. She looked at the broken bowl on the floor. She looked back at me. And then she said something that I have carried in my chest every single day since. She said, "I have been waiting 11 years for someone like you. I didn't know what you'd look like. I didn't know how you'd come. But I have been praying. And here you are. 15 years old and speaking 8 languages in a kitchen in Louisiana. So now I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." And then Cecile told me about the network. There was a resistance. Had been for years. Quiet, patient, running under the surface of everything like water finding its level. It wasn't one organization with a name and a leader. It was dozens of small connected nodes. Free black communities in New Orleans, sympathetic sailors, a Quaker family in Baton Rouge, contacts on the Underground Railroad moving north. Information flowing in careful pieces, no one person knowing the whole picture. Cecile had been a node in that network for 11 years. Passing messages. Watching. Waiting for something she couldn't quite name. Now she was looking at me. Now she knew what she'd been waiting for. I said, "What do you need me to do?" She said, "Not yet. First, you finish the Creole." I became 3 people. That was the only way to do what needed to be done. One woman couldn't move through all the worlds I needed to move through. But 3 could. The first was Nadia, invisible, domestic, present in the Fontenot house, gathering intelligence from the inside. The second was Marie. Marie was free. Marie was Creole. Marie dressed well and spoke impeccable French and attended the social gatherings that the planter class of Louisiana used to do their real business. Not the official meetings. The dinner parties. The afternoon visits. The conversations that happened when men were comfortable and didn't think they were being observed. Marie heard everything. Which plantation owners were in debt. Which overseers had been bribed before and could be bribed again. Where the patrol routes were weakest. Which nights the guard changed. Which roads north were watched and which ones weren't. The third was Greta. Greta was German. Not by birth, by sound. by accent and vocabulary and the specific rhythms of someone raised speaking German before English. There was a merchant in New Orleans, Carl Heuser, heavy-set, loud, completely convinced of his own importance, who did business with half the plantation owners in 3 parishes. He kept records. He had access to shipping manifests, financial correspondence, legal documents. And he had absolutely no defenses against a quiet, helpful German-speaking woman who seemed to know everyone and asked such intelligent questions. Within 8 months, I had, through Greta, seen documents that told me the patrol schedules for 3 parishes, the financial situation of every major plantation within 20 miles, and, most importantly, a letter being sent between plantation owners discussing the upcoming sale of their entire enslaved populations down the river. 212 people. Downriver. Permanent separation. Families split and scattered to places where no network could reach them, no railroad could find them, no resistance could touch them. The letter had a date. March of 1853. I read that letter standing in Carl Heuser's back office while he was at lunch, and something happened in me that had never happened before. Something I had kept sealed for 9 years, since that last morning in Dakar, since my mother's voice saying my name and then cutting off. Something I had packed away in the quiet place inside me and kept there through everything, through the ship and the auction block and the years of silence. It cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Just enough to let the heat out. I folded that letter and put it back exactly where I'd found it. I smoothed my dress. I smiled at the clerk on my way out. I walked 4 blocks before I stopped walking, stood in an alleyway in New Orleans, and allowed myself 30 seconds to feel every single thing I had been storing. Then I put it back. Sealed it up. Walked back to the plantation. Told Cecile. Said, "We have until November." Thomas arrived in August. Transferred from a plantation in Georgia. 20 years old. Tall in a way that cost him. Overseers noticed tall men, watched them harder, cut them down faster. He had the specific look of someone who had decided to stop being afraid and hadn't yet figured out what to replace it with. Anger was filling that space for now. Raw, unshapen anger. The most dangerous kind. He noticed me within a week. Not the way men sometimes notice women. He noticed me the way a suspicious person notices something that doesn't quite add up. I'd been careful. But careful has limits when the person watching you is smart enough to see the edges of it. One evening he came up beside me while I was hanging laundry. He didn't look at me. He spoke quietly, facing forward. He said, "I watch people. It's the only thing I'm good at. And I've been watching you. You move different. You listen different. At dinner last night you were pouring wine when Fontenot's business partner said something in French and your hand, just for a second, your hand changed. Like you heard something that mattered. Nobody else saw it. I saw it. I didn't say anything." He said, "I don't know what you're doing. But I want in." I kept hanging laundry. I took my time. I said, "You want in. Have you thought about what in costs?" He said, "I don't care what it costs." I said, "You will. Everyone does. The question isn't whether the price is high. The question is whether you'll still be standing when you find out what it is. Most people aren't." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Try me." I looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes were steady. His hands were still. He was angry, yes, but under the anger there was something older and quieter. Something that had already decided. I gave him a test. I gave him a message. 7 words, specific sequence, no written record, to deliver to a man named Solomon at a blacksmith shop on the edge of town. I told him to say it exactly as I gave it to him, in exactly that order, and to come back and tell me word for word what Solomon said in response. He was back in 4 hours. He recited Solomon's response, word for word. Didn't add anything. Didn't ask what any of it meant. I said, "Come back tomorrow morning, before sunrise." He came. And that was how I got the one thing my plan had been missing. Cecile was my eyes inside the network. Marie and Greta were my reach into the white world. But I needed someone who could move at night, coordinate the physical movement of people, manage what happened on the ground when I wasn't there. Thomas was built for that. We were not a love story. I want to be clear about that. We were something rarer and stranger and, in some ways, more profound than a love story. We were two people who trusted each other with something more precious than feelings. We trusted each other with lives. His name was Dupree, 53 years old. He had been passed between 4 different plantations in 12 years, sold and resold like a piece of furniture that nobody quite wanted but nobody could bring themselves to throw away. Every time he'd been sold, he'd been taken further from the people he knew. His family, a wife, 2 daughters, a son, had been scattered across Louisiana and Mississippi over the course of a decade. I had known Dupree was fragile. I had known it and I had let him into the outer edge of the network anyway, because he had information about the patrol routes on the neighboring plantation that I couldn't get any other way. That was my mistake. Not the only one I ever made, but the one that almost ended everything. One morning in October, Fontenot looked at me differently. I don't mean he looked at me with suspicion. I had managed suspicion before. This was different. He looked at me the way you look at something when you've just been given a piece of information that has rearranged the picture. Like he was seeing a shape he hadn't seen before. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. He looked away. We both pretended it hadn't happened. I went back to the kitchen and stood very still for a moment. I said to Cecile, "Someone talked." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Fontenot looked at me." She said, "He looks at you." I said, "Not like that. Not with that face. Something changed this morning. He knows something. Not everything. He doesn't know everything or I'd already be in a cell. But something. Enough to make him start looking." We found out 3 days later. A field hand on the neighboring property had seen Dupree come out of the overseer's office. The overseer had been in the main house that same afternoon for 2 hours. Dupree hadn't given names. I have to believe that. He didn't know most of the names anyway, by design. But he had given something worse than names. He had given a description of the method. Messages in multiple languages. A woman who moved between worlds. Meetings in the German merchant's storeroom. Not enough to arrest anyone. Enough to make Fontenot start watching. I had maybe 2 weeks before he connected enough threads to act. I had planned for this to unfold over 2 more months. I stood in that kitchen and I did the arithmetic. Network status. Who knew what? Which pieces were in place? Which ones weren't? I looked at Cecile. I said, "We move in 14 days. She said, "That's not enough time." I said, "It's all the time we have." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. We moved. The night before, we went over everything one final time. Cecile. Thomas. Me. The kitchen house. The fire burned down to coals. The door barred. 43 people across 3 plantations. Each group had been briefed separately. Each group knew their own part and nothing more. Not because I didn't trust them, because information has weight, and the less weight any single person carried, the safer everyone was if something went wrong. Each group had been given their instructions in their own language. That was the detail I was most proud of. Not just for security, though it meant that even if someone was captured and made to talk, they could only describe a fragment. But because I wanted every single person going into that night to hear the plan in a voice that felt like home, in words their mothers had spoken, in rhythms they'd carried since childhood. You are not alone. That was what I wanted those languages to say. I see you. I know where you come from. We are going together. Cecile was afraid. She had earned the right to be afraid. She had been living in this particular kind of fear for 11 years, and she knew better than anyone what happened when things went wrong. She said, "What if it doesn't work?" I said, "Then we die knowing we tried." She said, "That is not comforting, Nadia." I said, "I know. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to be honest. There's a difference." She stared at me. Then she laughed. Short and real, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her in months. The kind of laugh that only comes when the body decides it has no choice. She said, "God help me, but I believe in this. I believe in you." I squeezed her hand once. Then I let go. Thomas didn't say much. He'd been quiet all evening, sharpening a blade with a slow, steady rhythm that was somehow calming. He looked up when Cecile and I finished talking. He looked at both of us. He said, "Tomorrow we'll either be free or dead. Either way, we'll be done waiting." He went back to the blade. I sat alone after they left. Just me and the coals. Maybe midnight. I let myself think about Dakar. About the gold morning light. About my mother's hands. About the little girl at the market who spoke Portuguese to a sailor and made him give a better price and made her mother laugh. I let myself miss all of it. Really miss it. Not the careful, managed grief I'd been carrying for 13 years, but the full weight of it. Everything that had been taken. Everything that should have been. I sat with it for 1 minute. Exactly 1 minute. Then I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I looked at the door. I thought, the little girl from Dakar deserves to be mourned. She was real. She was good. She deserved better. But she can't do what has to be done tonight. So I put her down, gently, carefully, the way you put down something precious, and I became the other thing. The thing 13 years of surviving had built without my permission. The thing that was made of every language I'd absorbed, every patrol route I'd memorized, every secret I'd stolen from men who thought I was furniture. I became the fire. It began at 2 in the morning. Not with fire. Fire was the last thing, the signal, the exclamation point. It began with something much quieter. It began with doors opening. On 3 plantations, at almost exactly the same moment, people who had been told what to do and when to do it and in exactly which order, began to move. No shouting. No running. The overseers had been handled. The dogs had been managed 2 days earlier by a woman in the network whose particular skill I won't describe here, except to say that by November 14th, the dogs on all 3 plantations were not going to be a problem. The network had spent 6 months building something the slave patrol had never encountered and therefore had no defense against. A coordinated operation where no single node knew enough to unravel the whole. Each cell knew its piece. Each piece interlocked with the others in ways that only Cecile and Thomas and I could see from the outside. On the neighboring plantation, Thomas was moving 24 people toward the North Road. He had arranged, through contacts I'd made as Greta, for 3 covered wagons to be waiting at a crossroads 4 miles out. On the 3rd plantation, Cecile was coordinating with a woman named Nadia, who had spent the previous month memorizing every weak point in the property's fence line. And at the Fontenot plantation, I walked into the main house alone. The house was quiet. The guards were gone. Thomas had handled that before he left. The family was asleep. The halls were dark. I knew this house the way I knew my own heartbeat. I had walked these floors for 9 years. Fontenot's study was at the end of the east hallway. The door was closed. Light underneath it, a single candle. He was still awake. Reading, maybe. Or thinking. Or perhaps some part of him already knew that something was wrong, some animal instinct moving in the dark underneath his conscious mind, telling him the night felt different. I opened the door. He was at his desk. He looked up. For a moment we simply looked at each other across the length of that room. 9 years of master and servant, 9 years of me being invisible while I watched him, 9 years of every word he'd ever said in this house pouring into me and being stored and used and converted into this exact moment. He looked at my face. And he knew. He said, in French, "It was you. This whole time." I answered him in French. Perfect French. His French. The French of the educated Creole class. The French of the drawing rooms and dinner parties he'd hosted while I stood in the corner with a pitcher of water. I said, "This whole time." He stared. Something moved across his face that I had never seen there before. Something that looked almost like, not respect. Not exactly. But something in the neighborhood of it. The recalibration of a man who has realized he has been wrong about something in a fundamental way. He said, "How many languages?" I said, "Enough." His hand moved toward the desk drawer. And Thomas stepped out of the shadow beside the bookcase. Fontenot's hand stopped. I said, "There is nothing in that drawer that changes tonight. You should know that the people you were planning to sell downriver in March, they're leaving now. Not in the direction you'd send them. The other direction. And there is nothing you can do about it because by the time anyone who can help you knows what's happening, it will already be done." He said, "You'll hang for this." I said, "Maybe. But not tonight." I turned to leave. He said, "Wait." I stopped. I did not turn around. He said, "How did you? I watched you. 4 years. You never. How did no one know?" I said, "Because you only see what you expect to see. You expected to see a child. You expected to see property. You expected to see something that didn't have an interior life, didn't have a strategy, didn't have 8 languages and 11 years of your private conversations stored in her memory. You saw what you wanted to see. That was always your choice. Not mine." I walked out. Thomas followed. The house was already empty behind us. We walked out into the November night and I looked up at the sky and I thought, I will remember this sky for the rest of my life. Whatever comes after this, whatever happens next, I will remember this exact sky. Then I saw the first light. On the horizon. Orange. Growing. The third plantation's signal fire. It was done. But here is the moment I want you to hold. The moment that the riders and the militia and the investigators would circle around for weeks afterward, unable to explain it. When they finally entered Fontenot's study, hours later, after the bells had stopped ringing, after it became clear that something unprecedented had happened, they found the room untouched. His papers in order. His candle burned down to nothing. And on the wall, written in 7 languages, in 7 different hands, because I had arranged it, I had coached 7 people to write 1 line each in a language that was theirs, were 7 versions of the same 4 words. We were never yours. 7 languages. 1 message. The investigators tried to figure out who had done it. They catalogued the languages. They brought in a scholar from Tulane who identified Wolof, Portuguese, Fula, English, French, German, Spanish. He said he had no explanation for how 7 speakers of 7 different languages had been present in one room. He said it was impossible. I wasn't there to tell him that impossible was a word used by people who hadn't been paying attention. They called it a disturbance. That was the word in the official report. Disturbance. 3 plantations. 212 people. A coordinated operation involving at least 3 parishes, advanced preparation of at least 6 months, and a level of strategic sophistication that, had it been attributed to a military commander, would have filled 3 columns in the newspaper. Disturbance. I read that report 20 years later. Someone in the network had kept a copy. I read it twice. Then I put it down very carefully on the table and I sat still for a long time. Here is what happened to the investigation. It died. Not because the people in charge were merciful. Not because they couldn't find leads. It died because the truth of what had happened, the real truth, the full picture, was something they could not allow to be public knowledge. Because the truth was this: over 200 enslaved people had outwitted 3 plantation owners, their overseers, and the St. James Parish Slave Patrol, using a multilingual intelligence network that had operated undetected for nearly 3 years. A truth like that is contagious. Every enslaved person in Louisiana would have heard that story within a month. Every planter would have started seeing shadows. The entire architecture of control, built on the premise that the people being controlled were incapable of this kind of thinking, this kind of planning, this level of sophistication, would have developed a crack. They couldn't afford the crack. So they buried it, changed the records, minimized the numbers, called it coincidence, runaways, disorganized chaos. Put the Fontenot Plantations assets in the hands of a cousin. Made Fontenot himself scarce. I heard later he moved to France, which I found appropriate. And 212 people moved north. Into lives that have no official record. Into communities that absorbed them and protected them and gave them new names if they wanted them, or kept their old names if they preferred, whatever they chose. That was the point. That it was their choice. 4 people died that night. I need to say their names. Joseph. Miriam. Calvin. A woman who went by Sunday, whose full name I never learned. I have said their names every single day since November 14th, 1852. Every single day. Because the easiest thing history does to people is make them anonymous. Makes them a number or a footnote or a word like disturbance. I will not do that. Not to them. Not to anyone who walked into that night with us. Joseph. Miriam. Calvin. Sunday. Say their names. I'm going to tell you what happened to the people I loved. Cecile made it north. I know because 3 months after November, I received a letter. No return address. No signature. Written in Haitian Creole, which no letter carrier in Louisiana could read. 3 words. I am here. That was all. I am here. I held that letter for a long time. Read it maybe 12 times. Then I folded it and kept it, and every time the weight of everything got too heavy, I took it out and read it again. I am here. 3 words. Enough. Thomas, I don't know. He went his own way the night it ended. We said goodbye at the crossroads in the dark, and he walked north and I walked a different direction, and we did not embrace, did not make promises, did not talk about what came next. There was nothing to say. We had done what we came together to do. Thomas was built for the fight. I always knew he wasn't built for what came after. Some people are made for the making of a thing and not for the living in it. I understood that. I respected it. I hope he's somewhere cold and quiet, far from Louisiana. I think he'd like that. Cold and quiet and nobody needing anything from him for a while. As for me, I have moved. Several times. I will not tell you where I am now. Not because I don't trust you, but because the habit of caution is one you cannot simply put down after you've carried it for 20 years. It becomes part of your posture, part of how you walk through a room. I still listen. That never stopped. Every new city, every new room, I listen. I hear the languages. I feel them arrange themselves in me. I've added 4 more since 1852. I speak 12 languages now. 12 doors. 12 maps of the world. I don't know why I was born with this. I've stopped trying to explain it. What I know is this: a gift is not neutral. It becomes what you use it for. I used mine to move 212 people out of the dark. That's what it was for. That's what I was for. My mother called my tongue made of water. Said it took the shape of whatever it touched. She was right about the shape. She just didn't know yet what it was going to need to hold. They ask me sometimes, the people I've eventually trusted enough to tell, they ask if I was afraid. I tell them the truth. Every single day. For 9 years, I was afraid every single day. The kind of fear that lives in your chest and never fully leaves. You just learn to breathe around it. But here is what fear taught me. It taught me to listen. And listening, real listening, the kind where you forget yourself and just hear, that is the most dangerous thing a human being can do. Not dangerous to yourself. Dangerous to the people who depend on you staying silent. Dangerous to the systems that need you ignorant. Dangerous to the worlds that are built on the assumption that some people don't understand what's being said about them. They thought language was just sound. Just words. Just noise made by mouths. They didn't understand that every language is a map. A map of how a people see the world. What they name. What they leave unnamed. What they're afraid of. What they love. What they're trying to hide. I had all the maps. Every single one. My name is Nadia. I was born in Dakar in 1834. I was taken at 9 years old. I was sold on a wooden platform in New Orleans while a man in white linen looked at me like I was something to be calculated. The records say I never existed. The records are wrong. I existed. I burned. And now you've heard my name. They can't bury it anymore.